Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Calm 350. I know that you did not receive your video earlier this week, and thank you to every one of you who emailed me and said, hey, what's going on this week? I appreciate the note, and hopefully we won't have that problem again. Blackboard seems to have lost all 3 courses of mine, and the videos didn't go out to anybody on schedule at all. So here we are. I'm redoing the videos, and we will be leading into week 3, as right now we're in week 2. The good news is that you did get a video introducing you to rhetoric and a lot of what you read, hopefully, in the 2 works, the 2 works by Isocrates and the 1 work by Gorgias. Now, Gorgias writes to us the Enchiridion on Helen and really gives us a sense that rhetoric can be enjoyable, that there's an ethic to it, and he really rewrites the history of how we should remember Helen. I believe that I gave that to you in a video earlier. And then also we have Against the Sophists and Antidosis coming from Isocrates. Isocrates is accused of not giving back to the community through a ship or building a library or a statue or something. And he says, well, no, I'm not doing that. I don't have the money for one thing. And for another, I'm reinvesting it back in my students. They are the immortality. They are the investment I am making. And that is what antidosis is all about. It's about trying to preclude the argument or give the antidote to the argument against him that he is not doing for the community what he needs to be doing. Well, at the same time, he's also arguing how the sophists are bad. And that one's pretty straightforward. So I don't really know how much detail I need to go into that any more than I already have. So hopefully you got through those. Now, those are very short readings, and the readings that we had, that was the readings for this week. But the readings that we have coming up in week 3 are much more difficult. And so I want to give you a little bit of a preview as you go into Plato and Aristotle. Now, the first thing I noticed when I looked at the syllabus today was that I've really got us rushed on how quickly we're going to go through these readings. So let's make a change to the syllabus right now. Your exam will now occur during week 6. And yes, you'll have a week to take it. I'm going to move it from week 5 to week 6 because we may need to slow our roll a little bit on the reading. I might be pushing it a little bit too quickly for my taste and possibly for yours. So the first exam will be during week 6. Now, we are in week 2 right now. On Monday, we start week 3. So hopefully that gives you some idea. So if you need to slow down a little bit on the reading, I completely understand. If you read the next couple pieces, Phaedrus first, and you fall asleep during the first 3 pages several times, I'm also going to say I understand that completely as well. Phaedrus and the Rhetoric by Aristotle are daunting, difficult to read, and make me want to sleep. And if they make me feel that way, I can only imagine how they make you feel. However, it is important for us to read these because rhetoric as a foundation of study is the foundation of communication. Okay, it really is. It's where communication is born out of. The idea of public speaking, the idea of writing properly. These are communication activities. And so this is where our roots are. And it really sucks that we have to read these, but if it makes you feel any better, I read all 3 books of the Rhetoric. I read all of Plato's works. I read the Politics by Aristotle. And I read the Poetics by Aristotle. And I did that when I was in college, not when I was in my master's program, not when I was in my PhD program. Literally when I was your age, I had to read all those books. Luckily, I guess for you guys, we have gotten now to the point where we are giving you really good, I hope, edited excerpts, meaning that we're taking pieces of those original works and giving them to you in smaller doses. I promise you it's much better than reading the entire like full work. However, the good news is that I have read the full work. So if something doesn't quite make sense to you, just ask. I'm not going to make you go search for the answer. I'm going to help you with the answer, because the breadth of work from both Plato and Aristotle, as I'm sure you can imagine, is massive. And so we have you just read these, I hesitate to call them small sections, but these much shorter sections rather than reading the entire works from them, to sort of help them become more, hopefully, a little easier to read. Let's put it that way. So what is it that you're looking for in Phaedrus? Phaedrus is a story, and it's given to you as a dialogue. And I can't think of a worse way to read a work than through dialogue. However, everybody in ancient Greece really thought the best way to learn was actually through dialogue. What happens in the back and forth of dialogue is, called dialectic. Dialectic is where you go back and forth between two ideas and come to a conclusion about which one is more probable or more likely. At that point, Plato stops. Plato says that's where the search for truth, for the good, everything else stops. Aristotle disagrees. Aristotle says, hey, wait a minute. What's the point of going back and forth in your own head about something and not testing the conclusion, not giving that conclusion to someone else and having another idea come back? How is that not helpful? And so when these two equally oppositional ideas come together and they sort of butt up against each other, that dialectic there causes what's known as the point of stasis. That point of stasis is a point of stability. It's where all things are equal. Guilt, innocence, stability. At some point, someone needs to make a decision and choose one side or the other and argue for it. And then a decision must be made by the audience on which way to go. The dialectic is where, like I said, Plato says we stop. But Aristotle says that point of stasis is where we begin rhetoric, where we begin to argue which side of this should win or logically is more probable. Okay, so all rhetoric deals with probability more than anything else. But for Aristotle, stasis is the point where rhetoric begins. All right. Now, we know that his definition of rhetoric is that it is an art or skill of knowing in any particular instance all the means of persuasion. So there's three parts to it. Do not forget that. Those three parts are very important for Aristotle. But let's go back to this idea of dialectic. Aristotle says that rhetoric is the counterpart to dialectic. In other words, you can't have rhetoric without dialectic. Dialectic is the way that we go about finding truth. Rhetoric is the way that we then share that truth. Okay? Let's start with Plato. So Plato tells this story in narrative or playwriting or dialogic form. I hate reading this stuff. There are essentially three characters. The first one is named Socrates. Socrates is the voice of Plato. Plato puts all of his ideas and arguments through the voice of Socrates, because Socrates was considered, of course, to be the most wise of all. The second character is Phaedrus, and he is the student of Socrates in this case. And back then, this sounds sexist, I'm just telling you how it was. Back then, only men had a chance to be educated. And the way that they would do that is that they would actually have one-on-one tutoring sessions. They might have discussion sections at some point, but then the teacher would favor certain students and would teach them one-on-one. And that's how they learned. Well, Socrates really liked Phaedrus, so that's who he decides to engage and have a debate with. What's the storyline? Phaedrus went to the town center and saw a great speaker named Lysias. Lysias is supposedly like one of the best speakers in Greece at the time. And he's telling a story, or he's talking about whether or not people should learn from people that they love or from people that they don't love. Interesting question. And Phaedrus decides to go back to Socrates and tell him about this speech and essentially give it again. And this idea of practicing rhetoric, the idea of taking a speech that someone's given and sharing it again, sharing those ideas, that is the practice of rhetoric. And back then there was no mass media, so this was it. This is how they shared information. A great speaker would speak in the town center, then other speakers would take that to smaller towns, and that's how word spread, particularly from the government, the Senate at the time, to the people in the rural areas and the uneducated. So a rhetorician's first job is to teach or tell the people what the government is saying and doing. Which sounds a lot more like politicians than I like to admit, because a lot of times that seems wrong. A lot of times our rhetoricians today are teachers, are lawyers, but not only teachers and lawyers, but people who can actually explain the government to its people, the people who can explain complex ideas to an audience, okay? So this practice of rhetoric for Phaedrus was debating this idea that it is better to learn from someone you don't love than someone that you do. Now, Socrates, Plato in this case, hates rhetoric. He hates rhetoric. He thought rhetoric hides the truth. Rhetoric can be good and bad at the same time, in the sense that it can convince you that something is good or bad at exactly the same time, using the same arguments. That rhetoric somehow mutates the truth, changes it, so that, the perfect thing, the perfect object that, you can somehow understand cannot be communicated truly. And therefore, the only people who understood truth were philosophers. And Plato really did want a philosopher king. He never wanted a democracy. That was not his game. He didn't think people could, function in a democracy. So what we have instead is Plato listening to Phaedrus re-give this address that Lysias just gave. And Phaedrus says, I can't do it as well as Lysias did. And Socrates sort of says, anybody could do it. It's rhetoric. All you have to do is just say what you want to say. It doesn't matter what's real or what's truth. You see where rhetoric got its bad reputation, I assume. So Phaedrus starts to recite this, Lysias' speech, and Socrates stops him. And no fewer than 3 times do we hear this speech from Plato through the mouth of Socrates, where he is demonstrating why rhetoric is not good. First, he argues the way that Phaedrus was arguing, or the way that Lysias was arguing, that it's better to learn by someone who you don't love. Then he turns it around and says, oh no, I'm going to talk about why you should learn from someone that you do love. And then he turns it around and says, rhetoric is bad. Why are you learning anything from anyone anyway? Which is kind of interesting, but can get confusing. So I want to caution you, when you're reading Phaedrus, Socrates, speaking for Plato, does not think rhetoric is good. Okay? So anytime that you see him say, well, look at what rhetoric can do, blah, 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 he is not complimenting rhetoric. He is demonstrating something that's wrong with rhetoric. So don't sort of get tricked into that idea of Plato thinking that rhetoric is good vis-a-vis Socrates in this dialogue, because that's not what's going on. But hopefully now that you know the basic plot, you can understand the reading a little bit better when you get through it. Probably not, but give it your best shot, okay? Because in giving it that read and giving it that chance for you to understand, you might you might understand more than you realize. So give it a shot is what I'm trying to say. The second work that I'm having you dive into, and again, I'm really worried about how much reading I'm giving you here, is Aristotle's work, The Rhetoric. Again, you're not reading all of the books that go into the rhetoric. You're not reading the Poetics. You're not reading the Politic. You're not reading a lot of works that we have handed down to us from Aristotle. Be grateful for that. But at the same time, I know that this reading is onerous. Give it your best shot. Aristotle does not write in dialogue. So that's the first good thing. In fact, his work is extremely well organized. And so when you're reading it, I think you'll find it much easier to sort of accept, because Aristotle writes from his position of being Aristotle and just puts out what he thinks and defines things and makes it very, very clear what his feelings are about those things. So much less work, okay? I will not be giving you those lectures until next week because it's week 3 and that's when you're supposed to get them. But I wanted to give you this little preview before you began reading because I know it's a lot and because I have you doing it in such a short period of time. So hopefully this helps. If you have any concerns or questions, of course, as always, email me or find me in some way, shape, or form. I am on campus from 1 to 3 every Tuesday and Thursday. Sometimes I have meetings, but I always put a note on my door that says where I am. So if you need to stop by and see me and you're on campus, feel free. That is not required, of course. If you need to email me or text me, as always, feel free to do so. All right, everybody, I'll be in touch next week, and it will be a lot earlier than Thursday, God willing that Blackboard works for us. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I'll talk to you on the other side of the weekend. Have a good one.